Godin Notebook. Basu 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 Godin Notebook. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Basu and Godin Notebook. Bonne Saint-Jean à tout le monde, and welcome to this new edition on June 24th. I am Marc-Antoine Godin. Arpin, we've been talking about how, it would be a busy time for the Montreal Canadiens and obviously probably for all 32 teams. But here we are. This is crunch time. Finally.
Yeah. Here we are, June 24th. Over the coming days, obviously tonight, Stanley Cup is going to be awarded. That's exciting. I think Canada has really taken to the Edmonton Oilers to a greater extent than I thought they would have. There was some video that emerged the other night from a concert at Place Belle in Laval, and a "Let's Go Oilers" chant broke out. And so that was...
Yeah, wasn't there one also in Quebec City that the same thing happened?
Oh, I didn't see that one. I saw definitely the one in Laval. Struck me because I was... that surprised me. But anyhow, good luck to both teams, and I'm looking forward to watching Game 7 tonight. But after that, we've already seen activity throughout the NHL. As far as the Canadiens are concerned, it's their annual period of making something happen. So we'll see what happens, and we're going to talk about some of those possibilities today. But first, I want to talk about the big news coming out of Philadelphia. Obviously, I think it's very pertinent to a lot of Canadiens fans and has given great anxiety to a great number of Canadiens fans and probably people in Canadiens management as well. With Matvei Michkov expected today, and maybe by the time you listen to this, it has become official, expected to be released by SKA St. Petersburg from his 2 remaining years on his contract and to join the Philadelphia Flyers as early as perhaps the first week of July or at some point in July. So,
compassionate grounds, huh? That's the terms that's being floated around, that he would be released.
Pierre LeBrun, Pierre LeBrun released that information, and there was also news there that he's now going to be represented by CAA through Paul Theophanis and JP Barry and Pat Brisson as well. But it's compassionate grounds, and kind of regardless of the circumstances, I think this is, the Canadiens took a big risk in not taking him. A, infuriating a good chunk of their own fan base. B, passing on what looked to be a premium offensive talent to take David Reinbacher, and the fallout that we don't really need to get into right now. But it's interesting that, one of the factors was Michkov's contract that led to the Canadiens passing on him and not really having access to him for what they believed would be 3 years of development time. That turns out not to be the case. Now, I think it's relevant to what we're seeing now in the sense that Ivan Demidov is available. I wouldn't say he's a similar player. He is similar in profile and he's similar in skill level. I think his game's a little bit more complete than Michkov's was. Michkov's puck skill and offensive flair and his shot, there's certain details of Michkov's offensive game that I feel are better than Demidov's, but Demidov does play a more well-rounded game. His compete, his engagement all over the ice, I think is a little bit more translatable to the NHL, and that Michkov's going to have some learning to do in terms of those areas of his game in Philadelphia. But if he does, the offensive part is dynamite, so if he does figure that stuff out, then that's a real hit, for Philly. So it's interesting to me that this drops on Sunday to be confirmed on Monday, just ahead of the draft, when the Canadiens are looking at a very similar player profile in Ivan Demidov, and has most of not just Montreal, but a lot of the hockey world wondering if they're going to pass again on a similar type of talent.
Yeah. Well, my read on this and I might have expressed it at this microphone before, but whether Michkov came over or not, I think that ultimately the reason why the Canadiens passed on him was not because of the fact that he might stay in Russia for a few years, but there was something about the player that they did not like, and they thought that he was not warrant of being picked at number 5. And I think that we should not look at this and saying, oh, well, now that he's coming, maybe the Canadiens should have looked at it some other way. What's interesting to me is that, Nick Bobroff and the Montreal Canadiens have a very good understanding of the dynamics at play with Ska. They are concerned with the unpredictability of how Ska operates. But you have people throughout the league who say, hey, ultimately, all the best Russian players always end up playing in North America no matter what. It may take a bit more time like it did for Kaprizov or Kuznetsov, but they come over. And the other thing is that we hear also is Daniel Milstein's clients also end up coming over too. So now I understand that the reality in Russia might already be different than what it was in the Kaprizov days and the Kuznetsov days. But
it's definitely very different.
It's very different.
They're at war, yeah.
Yeah. So Michkov at least provides, well, at least it suggests that this concern might be weighing too much over, and that's still, because that's to this day, Russian players still come over. And I don't think that it's because, the Russian hockey instances look at the player and say, anyway, we can do without him. We consider him to be flawed and we can let him go. Michkov remains, whether you like him or not, a premium talent for them. And they've been interested in retaining their top talent as much as possible. So when I see a news like this, it's not about Michkov himself. It's more to me regarding Demidov and say, you know what? Despite the concerns you might have, there is a path to getting the player without having to wait an indefinite amount of time. And if you focus on who the player is and what he could provide to you, you can have a legitimate hope that the player will come over at some point. So it's dicey. It's not black or white. I understand that there's always an element of risk involved, but that risk might not be as huge as they think, just because of the example we just saw with Michkov.
Yeah, the one thing I would say, like the unpredictability part. Michkov got cut by Scott 2 years in a row. I mean, you would have thought, especially with, 3 years left on his contract, that they would have taken him on their team this year. The fact that Demidov initially made the team, it was quickly sent down afterwards, but over Michkov kind of gives you a sense of how Scott felt about Michkov. And I believe that's where some of the nuances in this situation is I think the notion that Ska didn't really want to retain Michkov is a possibility. It's odd that he would get cut a second year in a row, and how they feel about Demidov in that respect is the question. Now I think Demidov's what he said and what he projected at Dan Milstein's camp down in Florida last week definitely helped his case, told teams that he doesn't intend on signing a contract, was a bit, I don't know if you saw the piece by Scott Powers, my colleague in Chicago, who mentioned when he asked Demidov, when do you anticipate being in the National Hockey League? It was one of the few times he referred to his interpreter. Should be mentioned that Demidov's English impressed everyone, that he's been working on it for a year is another indication of how badly he wants to get over to North America. Yeah. At this moment, he turned over to his interpreter, and after they exchanged, the interpreter said something to the effect of, we'll see what happens, or we'll see where it goes, or whatever, something kind of vague. So Scott took that audio and sent it to someone who speaks Russian, and it turns out what Demidov asked the interpreter was, do I have to answer this question? And the interpreter said, no, you don't. And so that's what they came up with as an answer. So, I don't think there's any doubt that Demidov will be here sooner than later, and the talent is quite it's quite intriguing. But there's, you know, I don't know the extent to which what happened with Michkov is necessarily relevant to Demidov if SKA has identified Demidov as a guy that they would like to have playing for them. And the fact that Demidov himself says he wants to be here as soon as he can suggests that there should be no issue there. But one thing I do know is that if Michkov is in Philadelphia playing for the Flyers in October,
Yeah.
that's going to be one nervous Canadiens management group watching this kid play and asking them, wondering if their evaluation of him was in fact correct.
Right.
And then the side factor, and really, you know, what maybe couldn't have been anticipated at the time, like, is if David Reinbacher is playing in the NHL in October, or even if he's not, if he's playing in Laval in October, the pressure on him grows with every goal Michkov scores or every highlight he produces or whatever. Not an ideal situation for the Canadiens in that respect either, considering obviously the fallout from them picking him, all the abuse he took on social media and what have you, and how it affected him. This is going to be, this has the potential to be a Kotkaniemi, Brady Tkachuk situation, but like on steroids. like way bigger than that.
And super unjust for Reinbacher, because it's not the same position. He's never going to put up as many points. It's not the same player profile. He's not going to provide even the same entertainment level, if you want to. And I consider this to be a factor, because in Montreal, people love to be entertained. They like their flashy players. So he's bound to lose that comparison if Michkov has any sort of success. So he has to just become focused. He'll have to just remain focused at becoming the best version of himself. That's the only thing that he can do. The rest, the comparisons with Michkov, I mean, it'll be unfortunate. It might look bad. And the fact that, had Michkov stayed in Russia for another couple of years, it would have given Reinbacher the time to build himself as a player without having that sort of comparison. But I like the parallel you draw with Kotkaniemi and Tkachuk, because that comparison's been going on from day one, and KK greatly suffered from it, and the Canadiens management too. It's probably one of the reasons why Trevor Timmins lost his job. So yeah, it's going to be dicey. It's going to be difficult for Reinbacher. It's going to be a test of his character. And it's going to be a test also for Nick Bobroff and management. But it's funny, because I guess that in hindsight, they'd love to have those answers before they have to make a decision on Demidov, but they can't, because this is coming Friday.
Yes.
So
the interesting thing to me about this whole thing is, and someone sent this to me again like this week, but obviously we saw it when the Canadiens released their behind the scenes, quote unquote, draft video. They made the decision, and it got green lighted clearly by Jeff Gorton. Like, they decided to put Jeff Gorton in that video, seemingly openly questioning whether passing on Michkov is the right thing to do. Like, he didn't specifically say Michkov, but it's pretty obvious who he was talking about. Right. And it's interesting that they decided to put that in there. It just kind of shows that there was some doubt in that room on their final discussions in Nashville. That video was taken days, literally hours before the draft. It was very, very up against. So the fact that it was still within conversation, just to be absolutely certain we're not missing an opportunity with this kid. I think their scouting staff feels pretty confident that they got the evaluation right, but I think management might be concerned that they didn't, and that's a real possibility when the kid is as talented, as obviously talented as Michkov is, and the holes in his game that he displayed are fixable frankly. And if he decides that he needs to fix them, and he works on them, those are teachable things. Whereas the things that Michkov can do with the puck are not necessarily teachable. They're pretty special and rare and unique to him. So just a fascinating turn of events. I'm sure all Canadiens fans are taking this with a very rational, level head, and just looking at it, looking at all the sides of it. But honestly, like, I will reiterate that regardless of Matvei Michkov, if you look at David Reinbacher in a vacuum and just look at the player and how he responded to coming over to the AHL the way he did, playing as well as he did, adapting to the North American style of game, the North American dimensions, was a really smooth transition, was a very promising sign for what the future holds for David Reinbacher. And I'm not just talking about like the goals he scored or whatever, but he, his ability to defend, his ability to make a good first pass, to efficiently get the puck out of your own end and get it going on offense, left many people impressed. And so he has a promising future. Now, does he have a superstar future ahead of him? Probably not. And I think the Kings knew that when they drafted him, but they wanted, a star level stalwart on the right side of their defense, big, mobile, and defensively mature. And that's not going to be as sexy as the stuff Michkov is frankly likely to do in Philadelphia. Like, the marriage, the Matvei Michkov John Tortorella relationship is just going to be really fascinating theater. It's really going to be something to see. But maybe Torts can get him to understand the parts of the game that he's kind of deficient at, while still getting the high end offensive talent, the dazzling hands and shot and everything that you get, that you benefit from. It could be a good combination for Philadelphia.
Yeah, well, obviously it's the gamble that the Flyers took when they drafted him. But you brought up Michkov at the top of the show because there is still a link that we can make with Demidov, and he's going to be part of the discussion heading into the draft on Friday. Last week, there was among the many questions we received, and we did not deal with it back then, but there was a listener who goes by the nickname Went Woos. He said, based on all the information you've gathered, what's your best guess at the Habs top 5 list? And it would be, and I think that you touched on it to a certain extent in one of your latest pieces for The Athletic with when you basically made a comparison between Demidov and Zeev Boyum, defenseman, who's going to be one of the probably one of the top 3 defensemen picked in that draft. We mentioned in a previous episode how there was not necessarily a likelihood, but there was a decent chance that if both Demidov and Lindstrom are gone, they could turn to a defenseman, but they could also choose to pass on Demidov altogether and go towards a defenseman. And if Lev Shunov's already taken the way that we expect him to be, the next thing in line would probably be Boyum. So if we go Habs top 5,
or Salayev, frankly, I mean, if Salayev's there too, that would be a debate, I think. Yeah.
So what's your best guess at the Habs top 5 list?
In my
emphasis on the word guess, because that's okay.
Definitely a big guess, and I get asked this a lot as I run into people, who I haven't seen in a while. So, who are we drafting? Who are the Canadiens drafting? Well, I really don't know. This is, in the last 3 years, this is definitely the hardest one to handicap. There's question marks with every guy, right?
Yeah.
If we take Levshunov out of the mix, even though I still think there's a chance Chicago goes with Demidov, they were in Florida en masse to meet with both Levshunov and Demidov. Levshunov for a second time, they obviously took him out to dinner in Buffalo at the Combine. Demidov for a first time, Scott Powers is again reporting that it is really down to those two. We'll see. We think that Levshunov is likely to be their pick. Anaheim's a bit of a Anaheim and Columbus are both obviously wild cards. So if I had to guess,
Yeah.
taking Celebrini out of the equation, I mean, I'm assuming that if Lashunov drops to 5, that he becomes an option for them. That they would probably maybe have to jump on that if that were the case.
For sure.
I think the Canadiens themselves are anticipating at least 2 defensemen to go in those top 4 picks. In which case, you assume that would be Lashunov and in all likelihood Silayev.
Mm-hmm.
So of the rest, I would put Lindstrom at 1, Demidov at 2, William at 3. And after that, Beckett Seneca, I think, would be there.
Yeah.
And probably TJ Ginla. That would be, even though they obviously just, demonstrated some interest in Sam Dickinson taking him out for dinner in Buffalo, Cole Eiserman, what we mentioned on the podcast earlier, that was in all likelihood a reflection of their desire to move up from number 26 and nab a pick in the teens. So that's my best guess. That's a total guess.
Yeah.
I have no idea what they're actually thinking, but that's my guess. Do you agree with that guess or not?
Pretty much. I would put, if you make you have to make a top 5 list based on how you would grade them. And even if you take off Celebrini of the equation, I won't necessarily assume that Silayev will necessarily be taken before. And even Levshunov. If I had to do a top 5 list, not counting Celebrini, I would probably go Lindstrom 1, Levshunov 2, Demidov 3, Buyam 4, and I'm not even sure if there's a number 5.
I think if Silayev's available, he's in that 5. I took Levshunov and Silayev out.
Yeah.
I think there's...
Yeah, you can put them in because it's not a guarantee that Silayev will be taken.
All right, I'll put them in. So I would agree Lindstrom at 1, even though there are, I think, legitimate questions about his back and his future after that injury. But I would put Lindstrom 1, probably Levshunov 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then Demidov 3, I would agree with you. And then I think it would probably go Buyam Silayev for me. That's... Okay. Yeah. Silayev would be... And I think those are so interchangeable. It's honestly Silayev is such a unique prospect, which is why I don't think he'll be available at 5. One of Anaheim or Columbus are likely to take him. Hell, even Chicago could take him for all we know. Honestly, it's very possible. We don't see guys like that very often.
No.
But yeah, I think if one of Levshunov or Silayev are available at 5, the Canadiens have to do some real soul searching and really are going to have to, maybe bite the bullet in a sense. And Ken Hughes is going to have to come out and explain why they took a defenseman over the highly skilled winger for a second year in a row, and just do it. But yeah, the variability, the wild card nature of this draft is going to make it for really fun viewing on Friday night. Going to be a really, really interesting draft leading up to the Canadiens pick, and it's not. For once, it's not the first time in this administration where the draft does not start with Montreal's pick. It starts much earlier than that. So they're going to have to read and react and sort of, call audibles if necessary.
Yeah. I think the two, Trevor Timmins once talked about the year that they drafted Cole Caulfield. He said that they had some helps. A plural
yes.
helps, yeah,
Uh-huh.
and that which enabled them to draft Caulfield. I think that for all those fans who would like the Canadiens to draft a forward, whether it be Lindstrom or Demidov, I think that the two guys that could be helps for the Canadiens in that sense are Silayev, if he was picked in the top 4, and maybe there is an outside chance of maybe Beckett Seneca going at 4 with Columbus. That's that would not
which is where
so
Trevor
crazy.
Timmins is. No, it would not be so crazy. It's Trevor Timmins is not the head of scouting anymore, but he's pretty high up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that happening. It's not outside the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
But it's really, I mean, especially with Don Waddell coming out and saying, the most difficult thing to acquire is goal scoring, and we need it, and this and that, and Seneca being, I mean, a similar late riser to Kotkaniemi in his draft year, which Trevor Timmins obviously took into great account. Similar frame to Kotkaniemi. I mean, but the hands and everything, like just the late growth spurt aspect of Seneca, as we mentioned in last week's episode, I believe, it just makes him such a tantalizing prospect. He's like the Scottie Pippen of hockey in a sense. Like Scottie Pippen had his growth spurt in college, was barely recruited by colleges to play because he was only 6'2" or something. Then all of a sudden he was like 6'7" and had 6'2" skills in a 6'7" body and became a Hall of Famer and an all-time NBA great. And so I'm not saying that Beckett Seneca, that's going to happen for him, but an NHL team could hope that late growth spurt, having acquired the skills of a small man and then suddenly becoming a big man and still not fully grasping how to play as a big man and how to skate as a big man and how to be on balance, to maintain his balance and use his reach and all sorts of things, gives him a really high ceiling. So yeah, I think he's definitely a potential help for the Canadians, and frankly, he might be a pick for the Canadians for all we know. I mean, honestly, if they get to 5, I would not fall out of my chair if the Canadians drafted Beckett Seneca at 5.
It would probably.
I'd be mildly surprised, but would not fall out of my chair.
I'd be more surprised if it was Iginla more than Seneca at 5.
Yeah, but even Iginla, like he's one of the youngest players in the draft. He's got an August birthday. He might be growing still.
Yeah.
You never know. I mean, and plus, obviously you've written about the bloodlines and how encouraging that can be, but he has really the board play, the hardness of his game and the elite nature of his shot. And so yeah, but there's a lot to like about all these guys, and there are legitimate question marks about all these guys, which is what makes it so fascinating. We'll see.
All right, switching gears here. Tomorrow, on the 25th, the Hockey Hall of Fame will be announcing who are the inductees for 2024. And former Canadiens captain Shea Weber is in his first year of eligibility. And I'm not sure if he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, but one thing is sure is that one day he'll end up getting into the Hall of Fame. Do you think it's going to happen tomorrow, though?
Well, we did this exercise at the Athletic. Eric Duhatschek every year, a former member of the Hall of Fame committee, convenes like a ghost committee of athletic writers. So there are 18 members in the Hall of Fame committee. He gathers 17 writers plus himself for 18, and runs the process the way they do at the Hall of Fame. And so I was tasked with making the case for Shea Weber. And honestly, like before doing that, I would have agreed with you, like maybe not first ballot, definite Hall of Fame credentials, but maybe not a first ballot guy, which is really an honor unto itself. It's really its own thing where you're a first, and Pavel Datsyuk is in his first year of eligibility this year. And frankly, you could make the case that even he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer, even though to me, my memory of Pavel Datsyuk screams first ballot Hall of Famer all day, every day.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. But you look at the case, did not make it to 1,000 points, never won, other than this, he won 3 Selkies, and that's deserving to itself. But anyhow, there's arguments you could make against it. And just like with Shea Weber never won a Norris Trophy, but he finished second twice by less than 20 voting points each time. Once to a 40-year-old Nick Lidstrom, and once to Erik Karlsson in one of his, I think his first Norris with the Senators that year, if I'm not mistaken. Thing with what, like he's 19th all time in NHL goals by a defenseman, having missed probably 3 years, if not 5 years, of adding to that total due to injury. If you look at Rob Blake's career, Rob Blake had a Norris, yes. Rob Blake's career tracks pretty nicely with Shea Weber's. You know, Blake got to finish his career at 40, so he accumulated a few more goals, but Weber would have easily passed him had he been physically able to complete his contract, which he really wanted to do, by the way. Everyone kind of assumed, oh, when the salary got down to $1 million, he was just gonna shut it down or whatever. But no, he had a real desire to make it to 40. No one in the NHL, no defenseman in the NHL scored more goals over the course of Weber's career, and that includes the tail end of his career where he wasn't scoring at the same pace. That's 16 years sample. He's well ahead of most defensemen. Some notable names in there. So yeah, I don't know. I think, you know, no Stanley Cup, no Norris Trophy, but 2 Olympic gold medals, a World Cup of hockey. There's an argument, and I tried to make it, but he fell short by 1 vote.
Yeah.
You needed 14 votes. He needed 14 votes in the athletics process, and he got 13. So I tried to make the argument I just made. Did not sway enough of my colleagues into voting for him, but I have a feeling the Hall of Fame committee, made up largely of former players, will have a different view of Shea Weber than a bunch of hockey writers would. You know, he is,
because of the intangibles that he brought to the game, his influence
just,
over a whole generation of players,
and just the almost unprecedented level of universal respect that he garnered from players. I think he probably has a better chance with that group than he did with our group. So we'll find out Tuesday, but I think he has a very strong case to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, despite the lack of hardware. We really need to get our heads around the Stanley Cup thing. Yes, it's a nice cherry on a player's career, but in a 30-team league or a 32-team league now, there's not enough Stanley Cups to go around. You know, we're going to have more and more players who never won it. Jerome McGinley, you know, Henrik Lundqvist are recent inductees that never won it. There are others. So I think that part of the criteria has to be looked at in the proper perspective. And I think in Shea Weber's case, you know, having gone through the exercise, I think he's a deserving first ballot Hall of Famer in my eyes.
You're right. The one thing that stands out statistically from Weber is that, you know, from the time that he entered the league in 2005, 2006 until his retirement, so during all those years, obviously played more than 1,000 games, but it's the 224 goals that really stand out. It's the most from any defenseman during that time, even more than Brent Burns. But a lot of those goals were scored on the power play. He was like Mr. Power Play goal. Over the course of his career, he finished first among defensemen with 106 power play goals.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think he's 10th all time.
I'll look that up in a second.
Power play goals.
During that time, during that span, so 2005-06 to 2021, Shara was second at 79. So it's a huge gap between the two. So this is, to me, it's pretty telling. I don't know to which extent you can say, well, it's less significant, or maybe it's more. Definitely the fact that he was this huge weapon on the power play made him a difference maker. He was 10th overall for power play goals among defensemen.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, 10th overall. Obviously,
my memory's has not gone so far. So
too bad. And all those guys in front of him are all in the Hall. So Bourque, McInnes, Blake, Coffey, Lindstrom, Phil Housley, Potvin, Larry Murphy. Larry Murphy's in the Hall, right?
Yes,
I think so. Yeah, Brian Leach, and then Weber. So
and then Gonchar, who's also eligible and hasn't been able to get in yet, which I think is wrong.
Former Canadians, great.
Yes, exactly. I think he should be in the Hall of Fame, and I voted for him in this process, but I don't know why. I mean, I think he was a great defenseman for a very long time and played a lot of years in the shadow of Nick Lidstrom nationally, and played in part of those years in the dead puck era and put up 811 points in 1,300 games is pretty damn good. So
Yeah.
Anyhow, I digress.
Anyway, I think you started off by talking about Datsuk. I'm not sure if there's really an issue with the Russians in the hall. Alex Mogilny has been waiting forever to get in. If there's a choice to bring those players in, it might come at the expense of Weber. If I had to guess, I would say that Weber is going to wait a year maybe, but it shouldn't be too long before he gets into the hall.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I mean, that's how our process played out. But I think I think the former player aspect of it will help him in terms of former players being the ones voting on this.
No, but it's not just former players. You've got former GMs. You've got reporters in there too.
His leadership skills.
All sorts of people. Being that in that committee.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's but at least it won't be 18 reporters is what I'm saying.
No.
There are players in there, so it'll help. Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. Exactly.
Oh, no. Okay. Next order of business. We're going to talk about the because there's a lot to expect on the trade front from the Canadiens. I don't know if something's going to materialize, but before we get there, just a quick word on JF Houle, who's departing from the Montreal Canadiens organization to join to become the head coach at Clarkson University. So he found a way to become the head coach of the Golden Knights, but he doesn't have to go to Vegas to do that. He can just drive a few hours southwest of Montreal to get there to Clarkson. Clarkson's his alma mater. He played there. He coached there. He's a very well-known and well-liked figure over there. I think it's good that the Canadiens understood that that's where we wanted to go. Maybe that he didn't see a path for himself to get into the NHL anytime soon by returning to the Rocket. So he's certainly not getting closer to the NHL by doing that. But if he considers that he's going to be a happier man for family reasons, and let's not forget that there are guys that graduated from the NCAA head coaching job to the NHL. There's numerous examples. Several.
Axtell, Montgomery, Quinn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, bunch of there's one every couple of years, it seems.
Yeah.
So I think that if he has success and brings this program to the top, he might be considered one day. But it puts the Canadiens in a funny spot because they have to find a head coach at a time where a lot of the good candidates are already placed in somewhere. So I don't know if they're going to look at the Q guys, or if all of a sudden with Pascal Vincent being available, they would try to lure him in. But if Pascal Vincent is willing to do that and willing to go there and take a step back and go back to the American League after being shaken up by this dismissal in Columbus, he could be a very good fit for them there.
Oh, he's a very successful and accomplished AHL coach for sure. Vincent's kind of in the same situation in the sense that Columbus waited so long to make the decision on him. A lot of the jobs around the league were taken. So even latching on as an assistant, there's not that many assistant coach jobs available. It's definitely not many head coach jobs available, if any. Is there an opening right now? Is it for a head coach in the NHL? I don't think so.
No.
Yeah.
No, I think San Jose was the last one.
San Jose was the last one.
There's a few openings for assistant coaches. Obviously, Marc Savard is replacing Guy Boucher in Toronto. I think there's still an opening in Seattle.
Right.
There might be one in Anaheim. It was covered. So it depends how many assistants a head coach wants to have also.
Yeah, exactly. So barring that, this could be the best situation possible for Vincent. I think a lot of people would look at the way things went in Columbus this year and think, oh, no, we don't want that guy near our prospects or whatever. But I think you talk to anyone in the Jets organization, he did excellent work with the Manitoba Moose for them. developing their prospects, having a competitive team, sort of marrying everything we talked about being challenges for Houle. Vincent did that to some extent with the Moose, although I don't think the Moose were ever as young as the Rocket will probably be. But, the Jets felt very comfortable having their prospects there. He could be a great candidate. I think there are others that are to be considered. I think, the Canadians, it's important to emphasize what you said earlier, that it was good for them to recognize how important this was to Houle and not hold him back. That's going to be looked at around the league as being a good sign of a good organization to work for. So good on them, because it really does put them in a tricky situation where they thought, May 29th, he signs a 3-year extension. And 3 weeks later, he's gone. And during those 3 weeks, a lot of coaches got hired. That's really the prime coach recruitment period. So, I don't think it was necessarily easy for them to say, yeah, go chase your dream job with your alma mater, because it puts them in a tough spot. But the fact that Columbus did something very similar to Vincent in reverse might make for just a perfect marriage of convenience. And frankly, for Vincent, if you can get a young Laval team deep into the AHL playoffs, despite all the challenges that entails, that would look good on your coaching resume and maybe get you closer to an NHL job. Who knows? I mean, it's really, he got a bad deal in Columbus, and I think he made some questionable decisions there as well that are legitimately worth questioning. But yeah, I think it might be just too convenient for the Canadians and for Pascal Vincent to pass it up.
I think it'd be awesome if it happened. We sometimes worry or wonder if, to which extent, the Canadians farm team is able to recreate what's being asked, to ask from the players by Martin Saint-Louis at the NHL level, and if they can reproduce the same style of play, the same mentality in Laval. I have no doubt that Pascal Vincent would be able to copy paste that and apply it to the players with the Rockets. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. He's still being paid by the Columbus Blue Jackets, and even if he was to get hired by the Canadians, he wouldn't have to renounce to a dime from the Blue Jackets. So that's good, but he might want to take some time for himself and just, knowing that he's got that money security just to figure things out for a while before he finds another job. But usually, guys like to coach. So when something's presented to them, it's fitting. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. But it's definitely an important job for the Canadians' future. You want someone there that's going to be able to graduate your players, get them in and out of there as efficiently, not as quickly, but as efficiently as possible. Like the time it takes, whatever the time it takes to develop players and get them ready for the NHL, you want that done with some efficiency and not have a log jam or a delay, developmental delay happen in Laval. And frankly, the Canadians have increased the resources around the Rocket to make that happen, regardless of the head coach. Houle obviously surrendered entire practice days to the Canadians development staff and had Adam Nicholas and Pellerin and Byron on the ice running practice occasionally, I think once a month or a couple of times a month. So, but yeah, someone who'd be willing to accept that structure is also important, because not every head coach would be willing to just hand the keys over for a practice to a bunch of development guys and do like skills work for an entire day, sometimes for 2 hours. So Houle was very malleable to that or flexible to it. They're going to need someone who's going to be equally flexible to that reality in Laval for sure.
If we go back to what's coming up this week, so yeah, there's the draft coming up, but we've been expecting a move. from the Montreal Canadiens. It might not happen. Who knows? Maybe that they've got big targets, big ambitions, and it might sum up to zero. Who knows? That we've both assumed that there's a good chance that they'll try to dangle that number 26 pick. We've talked at length about the overflow of young defensemen and the fact that they could parlay a couple of them, or at least one of them, and try to get an interesting player, especially up front. But when you look at guys that might be available, and especially what the Canadiens have to offer, do you think the Canadiens have the meat, they have the goods to really attract a very good player on the trade market just based on what they got to offer? Because to me they have interesting pieces, but is it enough to distinguish yourself from another team?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's, it depends on what you think they're offering. It sounds to me like everyone is potentially available, barring, except for maybe Slav, Suzuki, Caulfield, probably. Is Houle available? A lot of people seem to be trading him away among the fan base. I don't know the extent to which he's available. I think the Canadiens have a very sincere desire to get him extended this summer. Is Reinbacher available? Considering everything we started the podcast with and how much this team invested in this kid,
imagine that.
I highly doubt they consider him to be available. And it's so. If you take those pieces out, then yeah, you have to wonder what the Canadiens have to offer. The Canadiens have their surplus is draft capital and young defensemen. But most teams that have something interesting to offer are going to be looking at Houle and Reinbacher as being the guys that they would want. I don't think anyone's, maybe Mailloux would be of interest to some teams, and I think he might have some trade value, considering just the unique combination of athleticism, size, physicality, offense. Could be a good trade chip, but yeah, it's draft capital. Jack could too, but again, Canes have just this weird affection for Jack. It's not weird, actually. I think it's he's a unique type of player, but yeah, Jack could attract some attention, and you have to give something to get something. That's the thing. And so when the Canadiens have a lot of draft, when we talk about them having draft capital, if a player emerges on the market and a team is looking for draft picks, yes, the Canadiens have draft capital, but they don't have the same draft capital as Utah does. And Utah has a new owner and a new market. They would love to make a splash, probably do something that'll generate some buzz in their new city. They have whacks of draft capital, way more than the Canadiens have. Chicago has tons of draft capital and tons of cap space. It's same with Utah in terms of cap space. So, in terms of competing for some of the names that are known on the market, and especially some that probably aren't known right now, the Canadiens are going to have to put up. I mean, the young NHL ready defensemen that are cheap is something that maybe they have that's a unique supply to them that doesn't necessarily exist elsewhere, under team control for a long time, but not necessarily top of the lineup defensemen. And the fact that they have a wide variety of them, you want a physical type who could play on a third pair and kill. You got Struble, you want someone with good feet, good brain, Harris, but these are not A-list prospects, So, you look at, the latest name, we were asked a lot of questions in the mailbag, which we're coming to soon. But, the latest name to hit the trade market, obviously, is Rutger McGroarty. Elliot Friedman obviously floated that on 32 Thoughts. Murat Atesh has since kind of confirmed that he expects McGroarty to be traded potentially by this week. You look at it would make sense for the Jets to want to get into a spot in the draft where they took McGroarty, so the mid-teens at the very least. So, the Canadians dangling that 26th pick, which is the Jets pick, probably is not going to get it done. There's going to be a lot of competition for Record McGorty. The Canadians are one of many teams that were very fond of him in his draft year. But, 26th pick, if the Canadians could do something like they did with Doc and use that 26th pick and some of their surplus on defense to go and get that pick in the teens that it would take, and then package that pick with maybe another young defenseman to go get McGorty, maybe that could be something that could work out. But it's the Canadians have options, but they have a lot of competition too, is I guess what I'm getting at.
Yeah. And even then, I mean, you say McGorty was drafted 14th overall by the Winnipeg Jets. So you could say, okay, well, they'll be looking at a similar pick. But, I mean, we're talking about the 2022 draft, and already, if there was to be a redraft, the order would not be the same. So is it the value that you identified on the player? Is it the rank that he was drafted or the rank that he would be drafted now? Because from 2 years after, with what we know about those different prospects, you can say, well, hold on a sec. If we were to make that draft today, McGorty would probably be closer to 10 than 14 because, probably that he would have more interest throughout the league than Matthew Savoie does or Frank Nazar, guys that were drafted ahead of him. So I think that the Jets will try to be as bullish as they can in trying to get a return for him, especially, among teams that might look at McGorty as saying that this is a kid who's really knocking at the door and is really close to being NHL ready. So I think that the Canadians should be definitely in on a player like that. He's got tremendous character. He's got tenacity to attack, to drive the net. I was using the adjective bullish, but he's a bull himself. Yeah. So I think, and he's a very charismatic guy too. He's got a lot of things going for him, and I'm not sure that charisma has to be high on the on the list of criteria. But he's a guy that that when you have that sort of prospect that becomes available, you have to pay attention. And I'm not sure to which extent the Jets are necessarily in the position of strength to move a guy like that. But I have no doubt that the Canadians will make phone calls and try to see what it would cost to get a player like that. Also, you cannot trade your 26th pick more than once. So if you allocate that for a player who's not yet in the NHL, you cannot use it after that and combining it with other assets to get immediate help, unless you think that you can insert McGorty as soon as.
Well, I think any team that trades for him will have to make that commitment. I mean, the reason why he's on the trade market is that the Jets would not guarantee him a spot on their team, and so he decided not to sign and go back to college. Any team that trades for him is probably going to have to say, listen, we're going to put you on our team right away. We don't want you going back to college, and you're going to have to, and frankly, there would be no reason for the Canadians not to. There's a number of teams, there'd be no reason for them not to. I mean, I think that's the reality of this situation. Similar to Cutter Gauthier. Cutter Gauthier wanted the same thing. Philly wouldn't give it to him. They traded it to a team that was willing to do that in Anaheim. So that's what's going to play out here, probably. And really, with the Gauthier thing and now this, it makes you wonder what the leverage is for American kids. Well, not even just American kids, but kids going to the NCAA. It's long been seen as an advantageous route for the teams because you have more time to decide on
4
kids.
Years. Yeah,
you get 4 years to sign them, see how the development goes. You run that risk at the end that he decides to go to free agency. But we've had numerous cases of kids basically sticking with the team that drafted them, especially in Montreal, most recently with Luke Tuck. Before that with Jordan Harris, Jake Evans had that possibility. But around the league, you see players taking advantage of that leverage, and even earlier than their fourth year. I mean, basically that's what McGorty is doing here. But, it's very rare that you have a first round pick that goes and plays his junior year in college. That's not the usual path for first round picks going to the NCAA. Usually they play 1, maximum 2 years. In the case of Caulfield, Hudson, that's sort of how that went. And so, it does make you wonder, like, what, the risk seems to be heightened now. That it's not 4 years, it's 2 years. You get 2 years to sign the kid, or else they're going to pull something like McGroarty is doing now, which is within his rights. Yeah.
For all we said about, at the top of the show about Michkov and Demidov and, the risk that's associated with Russian players, there's more examples of American players who use their leverage and basically end up representing not a risk, but a threat to the organization that drafted them, of just not showing up and wanting things done under their own terms. So I think it's probably underappreciated, that risk, the fact that the leverage that those college kids are using. And I mean, it's the position that they're in. They have the possibility of doing so, and they do. They just act like RFAs before playing a single game in the AHL.
Exactly. And now we've had 2 very high profile, very recent examples. One was a 5th overall pick, obviously, in Cutter Gauthier, and now a 14th overall pick. And it's just like, makes you wonder.
You can't go back to Adam Fox and other guys like that.
No, of course. Yeah. But I mean, this current generation, but Adam Fox engineering 2 trades, or, basically forcing 2 trades before landing in his desired spot, specifically the New York Rangers, is the most blatant example of that. And he was a 2nd round pick. But yeah, this happening kind of in back-to-back, really close succession, just kind of really brings to light that you're not getting 4 years to sign. You're getting 2. After 2, if you're not ready to commit to the player and put him in the lineup and put him in the NHL, at the very least, at the end of their second NCAA season, just the handful, the 1 or 2 games that they might get is a big thing for these guys. And so, it was a big thing for Hudson. If I'm not mistaken, Gauthier got them with Anaheim this year. I got 1, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't check that, but.
With Lane Hudson, it was a talking point at the end of the season. They knew that they had to sign him, because letting him enter his 3rd year, they were getting into a murky territory where he might take it the wrong way and say, are they really interested in having me over? And they didn't want to risk to go in that path. So as much as a player, especially a guy like Hudson, who was undersized and was seeing originally the NCAA route as a way of getting stronger and bigger and just spending a lot of time at the gym, this only goes so far. At some point you say, okay, well, where is my future? And can I have my future now? So the Canadians, I think they always remain confident that they would sign Hudson, and Hudson projected himself with the Montreal Canadiens. But the reason why it got done at the end of this season is because it would become a risk had they not done it at this time. So just because of that whole environment. So this is where we're at with Rutger McGroarty, and I think the Canadians should be all over this kid.
Yeah, and there's probably about 15 other teams that are going to be all over this kid, and that's, I think, a conservative estimate. So the Winnipeg Jets, they do have some leverage in the sense that there's going to be a wide open market for him. And they can do what they want, but it would seem to me that Winnipeg, being where they are in their window, that turning Rutger McGroarty into immediate help, especially with the Nick Ehlers situation kind of looming, getting some immediate help as opposed to draft capital and solely draft capital or futures would be a priority for them. But we'll see. We'll see what direction they go in. And for a second consecutive off season, good old Kevin Cheveldayoff finds himself in a situation where a player is forcing a trade out of his team. So we can only hope for his sake that he does as well with this trade as he did with the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade a year ago.
Yeah. And one other thing on the trade front, there was recently, I mean, there's been teams that have been named or associated with Martin Necas, and it seems as though Montreal should still be in the running. But the rumors also named Seattle and Nashville in the running for Necas. And I find that interesting because what we've been hearing out of Carolina is that they're looking for an impact player,
a star level player. Yeah,
that's it. And you look at Montreal, Seattle, Nashville. They see Necas as a guy who could bolster a group of forwards that would be in need of that type of player. And it doesn't strike me as any of those three teams really, at first, like that. It doesn't. They don't have anybody that really jumps out as being a star caliber player that could help the Hurricanes right away.
Nashville, Saros. I mean, it would address a need with Carolina for sure. I mean, this is just me speculating, obviously, but they're going to have to make a call on Askarov at some point. I think in an ideal world, they would have them tandem, but Saros' contract is coming up. I don't know. That's the one thing when I heard Nashville, the one thing I thought of was Saros as being a possible piece that they could include. Yeah. So we'll see. But Seattle's a head scratcher. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So but you're right. Carolina wants to gain consistency between the pipes compared to the guys they've been having recently. So that would make sense. But yeah, that's food for thought. We'll see. Yeah. This is probably a situation that will get resolved over the course of this week. And if not, the Hurricanes might have to deal with a potential offer sheet for Necas. So that would be a whole lot of fun.
That would be spicy. Oh, it'd be so fun if Montreal did it. If Montreal was the one to drop that offer sheet on him, that would be hilarious. I would want a live feed in Tom Dundon's like on the bill of Tom Dundon's cap. Just like a camera right here.
Do you have that expression in English? In French, we say, j'aimerais être un petit oiseau. I'd like to be a little bird and
fly on the wall. Office. Fly on the wall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's a fly on the wall, but in French, I also talk about I'd like to be like a little bird. I'm translating directly. And honestly, if there was a bird in an office, you would not hear anything. The only thing you would hear is, geez, there's a bird in the office. Let's get him out of here.
Exactly. So that's why I think the fly on the wall is more discreet. It's more discreet. Yeah. So it means the same thing. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. Exactly. What the hell is that bird doing in here? Yes. I agree.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but the fly thing is a thing in French too.
Right.
All right. Mailbag time.
Let's do it. Mailbag.
We do a mailbag every Monday, Let's go to the mailbag. Mailbag. They reach out and they write to us.
All right. So let's start quickly with Alain, who asks, hi guys, in many mock drafts, Caden Lindstrom is projected to be one of the first forwards taken after Macklin Celebrini. From what I've been reading, Lindstrom suffered a herniated disc last season. Despite the injury and the lingering effects, do you still project him as a top 5, or could he fall because of the risks involved? Alain, thanks for the question. Very briefly, just as we mentioned earlier, anything is possible. Honestly, I think, the teams have the medical reports in hand. It's going to vary from team to team how their doctors view the risk factor here. A back is a very tricky thing, and I've heard a lot of comparisons to Gabe Vilardi having a similar issue with his back in his draft year and how he has struggled to stay healthy ever since. So that's a bit of a red flag for, I think, some of the teams looking at Caden Lindstrom. It's if it weren't for this, I think would be a top 5 pick all day. There'd be no question whatsoever that he'd be a top 5 pick. It is only because of this that he might slip on draft day, because I think some teams do have some concern over the back.
Yeah. At the combine, somebody told me it's not going any lower than 6.
Right, but that was before all the team's medical staffs was able to pour through the medical information that was handed over. So it's I think since then.
Yeah, but you have teams that are concerned, but I think, and that could explain why a team would pass on him. But to have number 2, 3, 4, 5, and then possibly more, all, being so concerned with his health that they pass on him, I don't know. I think that one of those teams will take the gamble.
Well, I said it too, but we shouldn't act as if the health is the only question mark about Caden Lindstrom. I mean, there are concerns throughout hockey, really, that he does not have a highly developed hockey sense. He's a very raw player. He's only been playing at an elite level of hockey for a very short time, and so you'd also be gambling on the fact that he's going to still develop those things and improve his awareness on the ice of where his teammates are, his opponents, all the components that make up hockey sense. That he will continue to develop that aspect of his game, because at the moment, his ability to process all the information on the ice is a question, and I think it's something that he doesn't really shy away from. But he's very raw in that respect. So if that piece doesn't develop, then that's another risk that any team taking him would be taking on. So, but yeah, just it's. I would personally take, I think he's a fantastic prospect, and I would take that risk, but there is some element of risk involved, for sure.
Yeah. Alex Lou asks us, do you think the Habs considered the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade? For example, Pierre-Luc Dubois for Caden Primo. And how do you think he will do in his newfound land? Okay, so honestly, I know that there's been speculations about the fact that Dubois could have been on the Montreal Canadiens radar for obvious reasons, because he's a prime Quebec player, and anytime there's a Quebec player that's available, there's connection with Montreal. But honestly, in this case, I'd be very surprised if it was true. If you go back to a year ago, when there were rumors of a potential Winnipeg Montreal deal involving Dubois. So there were two aspects to it. The first one was, did the Canadiens have the sort of assets that the Jets were looking for to complete the trade? And even if they had, were the Canadiens ready to pay the amount of money that Dubois was seeking for his next contract? So in this case, a year later, the assets to acquire him it's irrelevant. It's really about the salary that you give the player. So unless you were able to send the other way a long and uncomfortable contract, let's say Brendan Gallagher, for example, which I don't think was happening anyway. I don't think that the Canadiens would be super comfortable.
I could see the Kings wanting Brendan Gallagher.
Yeah.
Burgess there, Phil's Dedeaux's there. I mean, there's some reason to believe if you're shedding. I mean, listen, Darcy Kemper is not a perfect player. I mean, they're getting a guy who's a bad contract. I think similarly bad. Yeah, Brendan Gallagher. I don't think it's too far of a stretch to say that if the Canadiens were taking Dubois off their hands, which I must reiterate, I agree with you, the Canadiens would have no interest in doing. But in your hypothetical, I think Gallagher would be the guy. Yeah, that has the best chance of being like, okay, we'll take that, and we'll see. They had Arvidsson next to Danault, and how many times we said Arvidsson was the Gallagher clone on that line? Well, what's better than a Gallagher clone is Gallagher than himself. I'm thinking.
Yeah, but my point was to say that if you have to be, are you ready to take on 7 years of that contract? And that's where Washington's a different place, because Washington's a much older team. They're looking for top 6 talent because it got eroded over time. They're trying to find a way to remain relevant and sort of rebuild on the fly a little bit while still, remaining a decent hockey team while Ovechkin's around. So it made sense for them, because Dubois is going to have the chance to be in their number 1 center, maybe potentially even in front of Dylan Strome, who was another interesting reclamation project for them. So, and they had the money to allocate long term for a guy like that. Whereas the Canadiens, they have a multitude of young players that will soon reach their peak and will ask the money that goes, with it accordingly. So for them, giving a long-term contract to a guy that is not worth that sort of money, unless proven otherwise, I'm not sure it's something that they were comfortable doing. So it's I have serious reservations about the possibility that they might have entertained that possibility this time around.
Yeah, I think there's no chance. I don't think they wanted anything to do with Pierre-Luc Dubois, and so I know that kind of Elliot Friedman sort of floated a guess that maybe they were involved and maybe they weren't. But I would be shocked. Like, honestly, I don't think they wanted anything to do with that guy. Okay, moving on. Next question comes from Devin in Sook, BC, which we had to do a pronunciation check on. Sorry for our ignorance of Vancouver Island geography, but we were not aware of this place. And having looked at it on Google Maps, I kind of want to visit it now. So Devin asks, with Jake Evans being UFA at the end of next season, do you think Ken Hughes will want to extend him this summer? Let him play out the year? Will Evans want to continue his progress and not want to sign anything until after this season and bet on himself and maybe go to market or take the security? Now, Devin had previously kind of mentioned how he saw some real development from Jake Evans, wondering if Adam Nicholas had anything to do with that. And so he mentions, I just wanted to give Evans a little love, a guy who I was ready to turf a year ago, and he made me do a 180 by the end of the year. Give him a couple decent fourth-line wingers, and I think he has good value to kill penalties, take a ton of shorthanded and defensive zone draws, chip in with 10 to 13 goals a year, and move up the lineup if needed in a pinch. I think a three-year deal for him would be ideal after the season. He shouldn't command more than the 1.7 he currently makes. All right, thanks, Devin. And yeah, I do think his case is the most interesting one among sort of the non-primary players on the Canadiens. Christian Dvorak is gone. Joel Armia, in all likelihood, is gone or will be returning on a much different contract than he has now. Jake Evans is the guy. David Savard is probably gone. Jake Evans is the guy among that group of impending unrestricted free agents that I think is an interesting case. Devin even mentions that we talked about Owen Beck and Kapanen coming down the pipe in short order for the Canadiens, and that really, if they are your bottom six combo on the third and fourth line center, assuming the development goes as planned, you're looking pretty good, right? So where does Jake Evans fit in that regard? I do think, this management group does have a certain appreciation for veteran leadership, just a veteran presence, having been through it. They don't want to be too young, too fast. So in that sense, yeah, maybe a 2-year deal for Jake Evans would maybe make more sense than 3. Just kind of get them past this period of Beck and Kapanen developing, and whoever they draft this week perhaps could be added to that list. But I think they appreciate Jake Evans' his presence in that dressing room, how much he loves to play in Montreal. I think a lot of that has value to them. And yes, I agree. Like the money, if he's willing to accept the same salary, which, having spoken to him in the past, he already feels like he's hit the jackpot here. Like he's coming off, a $5 million contract, and which he never really thought as a 7th round pick he'd ever get to do. So it's a question of him either trying to maximize his value on the UFA market, but I think if the Canadiens presented him with a reasonable contract, he would consider it. And I think the Canadiens should consider it. He'd be a good bridge veteran for them to sign and hang on to, in my opinion. What do you think?
I think that he could get more than 2 years on the open market.
I'm sure he could. He could.
So it's an opportunity for him, if he has a good season, to really have the best contract of his career, probably. Maybe not in terms of AAV, but at least in total dollars, if you include the number of years that he could go get. To me, it reminds me of Luke Glendening in Detroit back in the day. So Luke Glendening has never been seen as more than a bottom six centerman, but a very useful player, role player that was central to the identity of this Red Wings team for a number of years. And when he was eligible to become a UFA, he signed a 4-year deal with Detroit to stay there. And eventually he moved on. He went to Dallas and now he's been with Tampa.
Yeah.
So I think that for the Canadians to make sure to retain Evan's services, it would be a matter of number of years. And for that to happen, the Canadians would need to have serious reservations about having both Beck and Kapanen in the lineup at the same time in a short term, let's say as soon as next year.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, you can easily find an older fourth line center that you can just bring in for a year or two. So as much as I like Jake, I think that his best situation, his best opportunity for what he brings, and I think that our listener explained that very eloquently, describing what Jake provides. I think other teams will see that, and they will see that maybe as soon as the trade deadline. He seems like still a young and energetic player with plenty to offer. So to me, Evans would probably have a better spot, a better situation if he looked at the market rather than staying in Montreal. So that's why I'm not convinced that it's going to happen.
Yeah, that's fair. That's it. It would take a willingness on his part to forego that. That's clear to me. Like he would have to say that this will set me up better to be a UFA 2 years from now, or actually, 3 years from now if he signs it this summer, then hitting the market next summer would, which I agree with you is probably not a calculation that his agent would suggest doing. It would have to be a personal decision on his part to want to stay in Montreal, which I think is possible. Okay, let's move on to the next question. This comes from Shea, originally from Montreal, now living in Sonoma County, California. Man, that is nice.
Talk about improving your situation.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So he's asking something I have not read or heard mentioned anywhere about the choice to draft Reinbacher last year instead of Ryan Leonard that I'm curious to hear your thoughts on is the time it takes for a defenseman to become an impact player in the NHL. It's commonly said that it takes defensemen longer to develop, not only to make it to the show, but to truly hit their stride, perhaps 4 to 5 years at minimum. As such, it would make sense to draft a defenseman last year once the top 4 next-level forwards were taken, even if the Habs knew it was more of an elite defense-heavy draft this year at the top. Because if Reinbacher hits, it speeds up the window of contention, and it's more in line with the pieces already in place. Getting a top defenseman last year and a top forward this year seems like the right order of operations if you want all the pieces to come together with greater cohesion. How much truth do you think there is to that? How much do you think this management team thinks in these terms when drafting? And how much do you think this is planning? How much do you think this kind of planning is a consideration in general for decision makers when making close and tough calls? That's a very thoughtful question, Shai. Thank you very much. I think I recognize your name from the comment section at The Athletic. Thanks for commenting all the time on my stories. I read them. Listen. Yes, defensemen take longer to develop and reach their peak than forwards do. And going back to the beginning of this podcast where we're talking about Michkov and what Reinbacher's going to have to deal with if Michkov's in the NHL this year. That's a reality that people are going to have to understand, that if Reinbacher plays in the NHL this year, there's going to be some ups and downs for sure. 100% guaranteed that will happen. Just like any young player, but particularly a young defenseman, there's going to be growing pains. Now, the extent to which that played into the decision to draft him last year over drafting a defenseman this year maybe played a small, tiny part, but I really don't think so. I think they saw, my read on it at least, is they saw last year being so forward rich as a chance to get the top defenseman in the draft at a spot where you generally can't get him at number 5. Obviously, they like a lot about David Reinbacher, but they saw a similar dynamic this year in the sense that it's such a defense-heavy rich draft, defense-rich draft, I should say, that we have a good chance of getting a forward that would normally not be there at five because of the quality of defense in the draft. So maybe that's kind of a backwards way of looking at it. Maybe you should just take the forward in a forward-rich draft and take the defenseman in a defense-rich draft, and we've made that argument on this podcast before. What would their situation this year look like if they had drafted Leonard last year instead, as you mentioned in your question, Shai? But I think there is something to what you're saying, and that development curves enter into the equation for sure. But ultimately, I think it's not as big as a factor as the team building element, what boxes you need check to build a championship level team, and how Reinbacher checked a lot of those boxes for them. I think that was primarily that over what you mentioned, but I think what Shai mentions is a pretty good point as well.
For sure, yeah, but it's not every defenseman who take a long time to develop. You look at Caden Gooley, who arrived in the NHL and was given almost like first pairing minutes right from the get-go, and it remained like that for the entirety of his first 2 seasons. And now he's at a situation where if he can remain healthy, he's going to be ready to do a lot of great things. I have high hopes for that player. I think that the Canadians are in it. There's already a bit of a gap between the age of their forwards and their younger defensemen who are rather inexperienced, and trying to make that, connect that together with making sure that you're still in the prime of your excellent young forwards, and you hope that your best young defenseman will have enough experience in the NHL so that the two coincide. I think it's going to be an interesting challenge. If the Canadians were to draft a defenseman this time around, though, it would be because they think that there's a guy who can be a first pairing defenseman for them. And if they assess that he's a first pairing defenseman, you could assume also that this guy won't take 5 years to develop, and he would be on a faster track to rejoin that group. I don't know, in 2 years from now, maybe. Depends where he plays. That's the other thing. The position is one of the factors that affect the time that it might take a player to develop. But where is he being developed is another factor. The level of physical maturity is a big factor. You have a guy that can be super talented, but he might need to a bit more physical maturity before he really hits his stride. And we'll see, if in the case of either Zeev Bouillon or Zane Parekh, guys like that, they might need him a year more just because of that. And also, you mentioned the raw aspect of Caden Lindstrom, just because of who he is as a hockey player and his history of playing at elite level for only a limited amount of time. That's another factor that you tend to think, well, even though he's got the package that suggests that he could be an NHL player in short order, the fact that he's raw and that he needs to have the runway to develop too. So it's not just the position. I think that there are other factors that come into play when you try to gauge the time that the player will really hit the ceiling and become a full-time contributing NHL player.
Yeah, fair. Good question, Shai. We have another good question to finish up the mailbag here from Curtis. He says, perhaps it's too early to be talking about this, but assuming Lane Hutson hits, could he be an option to play on the right side? Here's my thinking. Lane Hutson is a positionless player, not that he doesn't play any position, but when he's on the ice, he's not afraid to leave his post to make an offensive play, whether it's in the D zone or O zone. To me, knowing this, it would make much more sense to have him play on the right instead of Gooley. Gooley can do it, but I don't think it's ideal for his style of play or for his ongoing development. If there's one guy that could play on his offside, I think it's Hutson. His very first NHL assist was on a play where he took the puck from the left point, walked the blue line, came down the half wall, and took a shot, juking a defender on the way. with that scenario, a possible future decor could look like Matheson, Reinbacher, Gooley, Hudson, Jacky, blank on the right of Jacky, UFA vet, or he didn't include Mailloux on the right because I think that makes it too many young guys at once. Harris, Struble, Mailloux, and Barron become somewhat expendable and can get you assets to improve your team elsewhere. Well, thanks for the question, Curtis. Basic premise of it being, could Hudson be an option to play on the right? And frankly, I don't think it's a bad idea. I think he's got the feet to do it. And he's got the positionless aspect of it is a legitimate thing. Yeah, I don't think it's such a bad idea. It's way better than everyone saying, can Lane Hudson play forward? I'll say that much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, the number of times then that we hear, oh, could Jacky become a forward? Could Hudson become... What's with this?
I don't know.
It happens constantly.
Yeah, I don't understand. Like seeing like a linebacker and saying, hey, can he play on the O-line in the NFL? Just move from defense to offense. Anyhow, whatever. But I think Curtis's hypothesis is not bad, honestly. If they have a need on the right side, which they do, and to me, I agree with Curtis in the sense that they need to get Gooley back on his strong side. It's really doing a disservice to him to force him to be playing on the right side. I know it doesn't really bother Gooley in the sense that it shows he can do it, but in an ideal world, he'd be on the left. I don't think it would impact Hudson's game as much as it does Gooley's game, but it's interesting. It's an interesting hypothesis.
Picking up the puck on the board on the right wall, though, when he would be often like either on his backhand or he would not necessarily. I think he's got the vision to take a quick read, and even though he doesn't have the full play in front of him, he would identify what's the right play. But isn't it a situation, and I don't have necessarily an answer for that, maybe you will, but isn't it a situation where when you're on your offside and you try to protect the puck and you might be more on your backhand, when there's forecheck coming at you, isn't that a situation where him being of a smaller stature, he would be more vulnerable?
Yes, but him having the hands he has and him having the quickness that he has would allow him to get pucks off the wall in an efficient way. And so not necessarily just doing the rim where you're taking it on your backhand and just rimming it back up the boards. He could potentially take it on his backhand and just kind of chip it to himself off the boards. He's skilled enough to do stuff like that. Listen, it's obviously not ideal for him either, but where I agree with Curtis is that of the two, between Gooley and Hudson, I think maybe Hudson, it makes more sense eventually, not next season. And the fact that Gooley did it in the second year is what makes it even more egregious. And so, but yeah, I think next year, if Hudson's even playing in the NHL, it would probably serve him best to play on his strong side. But yeah, I agree. Down the road, assuming he develops and develops techniques to survive defensively in the NHL and shows the star potentially has, frankly, offensively, yeah, it could be an option to move to the right side if needed.
But this is not something that that Martin St. Louis looks favorably upon. He's been forced to do it with Gooley, but he would much rather have the lefties on the left and the righties on the right.
Of course, any coach would, but that's not his department. He has to deal with the guys that he's given, and that's once Savard is gone, and
there'll be a hole there.
Well,
no doubt.
Maybe Mailloux and Barron work out. That's the thing. Like if they do, it doesn't look like it for Barron so far, and Mailloux's still a bit of a question mark despite an excellent rookie season in the AHL. But if they do hit, you have Reinbacher, Mailloux, Barron down the right side. That's pretty good. But then you have a serious logjam on the left side, especially if Matheson's still in the equation, which is obviously the challenge for Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton probably this week. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. There's among lefties who play on the right side. I mean, Harris has done
it.
Job.
Yeah,
and Adam Engström in Sweden has been playing a lot of right side because he's been playing to the right of that good old Davidson, who used to be briefly with Montreal.
Oh, Brendan Davidson, is that right? Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, doing it on the big ice is kind of a different animal. The forecheck's not on you as quickly. You have a little bit more time for that backhand situation on the situation that you mentioned earlier. We'll see. I mean, I'm interested to watch him play in the AHL and see how he kind of adapts to the smaller ice and the sort of the quicker decisions you have to make over here. But yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot on the left side. Something's going to have to give, and I get the impression we're going to have that. It's going to give. Maybe this week. We'll see. But it's incredible to me the pressure that Ken Hughes and Jeff Gordon are under by their own, not by their own doing, but by their own, they've created an expectation to expect something big just prior to the draft. Now they got to live up to it. So if nothing happens between now and the draft and they just wind up picking 5th and 26th and they leave Vegas not having done anything, it's going to be a lot of disappointed people. They're going to be like, what happened?
I think they will be disappointed.
They would be the most disappointed, yes. But they have definitely created that expectation. And so let's stay tuned. Just before we close up, just a little mini announcement. So we're going to try to do, logistics permitting, sort of a special bonus episode following day 2 of the draft to recap the draft, and then we'll have probably our final episode of the season, wrapping up free agency, which is just only a couple of days later. So you'll get a 2-for-1.
One on Saturday, and one on Monday.
Yeah, basically one on Monday. Monday would probably be pretty late. Maybe pretty late, actually. We'll see how the day unfolds. So you might only get it Tuesday morning or whatever, but that's our schedule. And then we'll be off for the summer from podcasting. So anyhow, that's the plan. Big week to come. We'll see what happens, and we'll talk to you on Saturday.
I look forward to it. There's going to be so much. Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you on Saturday.